Whoop whoop. Aloha.
Hello.
What is the greeting in Japanese? Oh my gosh. I would need to
Konnichiwa.
ask. Konnichiwa.
It's like an afternoon. I think it's like a later morning, afternoon, but still,
If my
that's where we're
daughter were
at.
here, she'd probably right now, well, she is here, but she's not in here.
Yeah.
She would probably be like, Mom. Oh, we're going to talk about being moms, uh, being mindful, um, being observant, being observant. What else?
And empowering our children.
Yes.
I think
God.
that's
Yes.
empowering our children and empowering other children. Like I have a soft heart for all of the people. Come on, I love
As do
humanity,
I.
right? We both do. And as some of you might know on previous podcasts, I've had conversations with my kids' teacher on multiple occasions. And I've always said it is not, it's about my kid and it's not about my kid, right? Like,
Yep.
we're here to talk about her and her behavior and her unwillingness to dim down her light, and also encouraging and empowering all of the other children to do the same. So,
Yeah. So I actually thank you for saying that because we were talking a little bit before we started just recording this podcast, and um, this is definitely a real raw, unedited, as they all are. But we didn't even talk about what questions we might ask and exactly what we would go over, other than we're like, what we were just talking about needs to be a podcast. Let's do it. Um, and what you just said just now about not dimming our lights. So, what I want to invite our listeners, let's use our imagination. Let's be children for a moment and let's use our imagination. And you can close your eyes if you'd like to. You can also keep them open. And first thing, let's look around and orient. Let's notice that we are somewhere safe. Hopefully, we're somewhere safe. If you're driving, probably should be looking around anyway, but you may not choose to close your eyes. So, what I want to do is use our imagination and imagine the inside of our bodies like space. The insides of our bodies are just this dark space on an overcast night. And then I want you to imagine those clouds starting to clear. All of those things that are obscuring the view of the brightest stars in the sky. Just imagine all those twinkling little lights that are out in the sky, in the night sky, and they're now in your body. And as those clouds start to clear away, revealing all of those stars, and the lights from the things around you go out, those stars start getting really bright. And I want you to imagine that you are both that dark space in the night sky, but you are also the stars that reside within it. You are those bright, twinkling lights with lots of different perspectives, lots of different ways of shining. And see your life as the potential of that clear night sky where both the dark and the light are welcome and beautiful. So, on that note, the sparkle like diamonds in the sky. When Dominique and I took the garbage out last night, the sky was clear, and we were noticing like there were probably a couple of planets that we could see. It almost had a little bit of a red tint to them.
mhm.
And I was, as I'm sitting here in my purview is some curtains that she has that have it. They're dark blue, they're midnight blue, and they have little stars cut into them. And I love what you were saying about not dimming our lights in order to make others feel a way that we really have no control over at all, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, you were saying you were imagining the night sky with the stars. I was imagining, on a cloudy, rainy day, the sun is still shining, and then you've
Yep.
got the clouds, and then the clouds move, and then the sun is just shining so bright. And like you say, same thing, right? We have both.
Yep.
But I think as moms, okay, we always talk about sometimes you got to go completely onto the other side. Like we have the contrast, right? Growing up or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
And then we sometimes choose to go to the exact opposite because we don't want to be anything like that because we've had that contrast.
Yep.
And that's not necessarily the goal either. It's like to be in the middle and to have that harmony. And I have on occasion, gone all the way over. I kind of consider myself more of a lax parent, trusting
Is it
my
really?
child.
Is it really lax?
I
Maybe
would
this
say
is
lax,
just,
but I don't have a trigger with lax. Like I think some people might have a trigger with like lax. Well, you just let her do whatever. It's like, no, I don't let her do whatever. But when I think about lax, I think about like calm, cool, like not collected, but just like, yeah, like what do you want to do? Like more of a relationship versus I'm the parent, you're going to do this kind of thing.
yeah. Well, that's
Um,
interesting because lax was almost a trigger for me. Um, well, not almost. It was. I was like, lax. That to me has a little bit of a negative connotation. And then I'm like, relaxed, relaxed
mhm,
parent. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm like, what's the difference? So thank you for
yeah.
saying that.
So when I think about being a mom to Grayson and, what did I want? I had a very controlling mother. Um, and I wanted to have a kid in a relationship with that kid that was empowering, right? Like I wanted to be able to allow her to make decisions, also to guide her, right? Because let's be honest, our children, until they're like 20, you could correct me if I'm off, but like 25, 27, their prefrontal cortex is not fully formed, right? So
Nope.
some of the decisions that she comes up with, I'm like, do you really want to do that? Let's talk about that, right? So she's just not like sent off on her way and she makes all of the decisions, but she makes a lot of them. And what I am noticing is going from a child who has been homeschooled or has been in a type of school who has a homeschool 2 days a week and a school 2 days a week. That is a very different mentality than someone who goes to school 5 days a week. And what I have been noticing, which Grayson chose to go to school. She wanted to go to school. And we've talked about before, she wants to play the game. And seeing, I told our landlord, which I consider her a friend because we have other conversations besides like, hey, we're going to fix this for you or whatever on the house. And was a kindergarten teacher. And we were talking last night and I said, Tanya and I literally, this is what our living is. We get paid to coach people and decondition themselves on their beliefs and their conforming. And then at the school field trip yesterday, literally watching it like on a live stream, real-time event, I'm almost dumbfounded. I don't know what the word is, but like I cannot believe it.
Yeah. I want to set the stage for our listeners in this particular podcast. Right now, Erin and I, as oftentimes happens, we're having this similar experience from different perspectives. So Erin and I both have daughters. Um, my daughter is 26, going on 27 years old. She currently lives in Japan, and I am here in Japan with her because she broke her arm a week and a half, almost 2 weeks ago. and it's a compound fracture of her dominant hand. And so I'm here to help her. And we have had um, we have had a relationship based on um, I wanted to be the kind of mom that was the opposite of my mom. And so we're having an experience right now with our relationship that is really actually a big part of the deconditioning process that's going on between the two of us. And Erin is just recently had a field trip with her daughter and is noticing, like, as Grayson is navigating through the school system, um, she's having her own experience and perspective. And what I love about both of what's happening for us right now is, like, I'm getting another opportunity to look at how I want to be as a mom and how I want to support my daughter, which in the past was really based a lot out of fear and my own just barely surviving. We talked about that. We were actually talking about school field trips last night, not because she knew that you were going on one with Grayson, but she just sort of was like, I wanted you to be a field trip mom. And I was like, I was a no for that because I didn't realize it at the time that this was an unconscious protection, but um, like I was in survival mode for my life. And um, she was talking about how much I've pulled away as a result. And um, so now I'm getting to have this experience of sort of like, how do I want to be as a mom? And how do I want to, my daughter's 26. It's like, I don't really have influence over her choices and decisions now. And I somewhat do by the the place that I come from now, instead of being fear, coming from love and compassion. And Erin is already in that place right now that she's starting to practice more like parenting from a place of love and compassion rather than fear and conformity. So, Erin, sharing your experience of what you observed on the field trip yesterday, what what was that like for you?
Let me just say, oh, 100%. I was in survival mode a couple of years ago. So it's not like Erin's always parented from love and compassion. Like that has been, I think we all kind of go through that, right? And then
Mhm.
we at some point in time, whatever is that's perfect for us, we come out of that and we see, oh wait, there's another way to do this. But for me, I watching, like, there's not much conformity that happens at our house. And I'm seeing, even with that, how much our children do conform because of society and teachers and schooling, right? Like, so even though we have, quote, air quote, right, like a chill and thriving household, Grayson is still going to do some of these things, conforming things, because what she's experiencing on the outside. So that's number one, of like realizing, like, no matter how, which totally judging words, great, air quotes, right, her home life is, she's still going to experience the human experience of conforming and,
And
ducking and dodging, which is
that's a
perfectly
good
fine,
thing.
right? Yeah.
It's actually a good thing, like,
Yep.
experiencing the contrast. I'm just like, I'm noticing how you're having that experience a little bit earlier, and for me, it came a little later. Like, I've been a late bloomer as far as that's concerned. Yeah.
And um, I guess just yesterday, seeing how much we just rush through life. I mean, I think as a society, we're taught that where we're going is more important than where we are.
Oh my God, yes.
And where we are going is actually going to make us feel a certain way. So with those two beliefs ingrained in us,
Yep.
what I noticed yesterday was so much of being on a time limit, and Jason was like, well, Erin, maybe this lady is on a time limit. It's like, okay, well then why don't we have a conversation about what do the kids actually care about? If we can only do two things, what are those two things we absolutely want to do? And everything else is a bonus, right?
Yep.
But it was literally like herding cattle, and not because of the kids, but because the principal, teachers, whatever, were on a time limit, right? And so much rushing of hurry up and eating your food and stop asking questions. You can reserve those for later. And, don't do this before you do this. And just what I noticed was the experience was no longer about what we came here for. Like, I don't even know what the experience was. The experience was, or the message that got sent that I was receiving on my end was, we're on a time limit. We have certain things we have to, it was like checklist life, right? And we told our brand manager that we wanted a hashtag of not a checklist life, because I think so many of us go through life of like, did it, done it, hurry up, right? And it's like, where are we rushing to? So kind of seeing that in real time and seeing how many kids, and the other thing, which, I mean, Grayson has said this numerous times at school, like she's been told she has to give birthday cards to certain teachers and she has to say something. And I'm like, did you want to? She's like, no. And just how much we're told what we have to do. And so one of the things was everyone had to line up, everyone had to say something nice and something that they learned from from this lady that taught us these things. And I told my husband, Jason, I said, what's really interesting is there's fear there that if the rule wasn't in place, that no child would go up and tell this teacher, thank you. But the reality is you would have the people like me who were like, thank you so much. I loved it. It was so great, and then you would have the kids probably like my kid. Cause I asked her, I was like, did you want to? She's like, no. And I'm like, then you would have the people, then you have the kids like my kid that were like, great, saw it, loved it. Thank you. But I'm not going to, sit here and tell you all the things I learned. Right. And which I think
because
there's
sometimes the things that you learn don't show up until later on in life.
Which is what I was going to say. And my daughter processes things out after it's done. Right. So she gets home and then she might be asking questions and then it creates resistance, right? You're creating resistance because you have people, children, whomever, that don't want to do something. The teacher that did the tour with us, she knows, right? She can sense the energy of like, okay, some of these kids are like all in, and some of these kids are like, okay, thanks, lady. I have to tell you, thank you,
Yeah.
And just how much of what are we teaching our children? That we have to do things we don't want to do, that we have to be rushed on a time limit, that feeding our bodies is second, third, maybe fourth on the list. And it's just kind of, I like to observe and process kind of I'm more of like, I always hang back. I kind of watch all of the people. I don't really talk a lot. That might also be my open throat, but just observing a lot of things and just noticing like, what do we want to teach our children? How do we want to empower them? What do we want them to experience? Not from us. And I think so often we have since moving here, Jason washes the car a lot more because of sea salt, right? It has this film on the window, and we can have our own film on the windows for our kids versus letting our children have the experience and letting them decipher, what they like, what they don't like, versus it almost felt like shoving it down their throats. And
Yeah.
for me, I don't know if the rest of our listeners feel this way, but when I'm told to do something, or I have to, say thank you or whatever it might be, it takes all the fun and the joy out of it.
Yeah. Well, we're teaching them how to be a homogenized version of who they are. We're teaching them how to disconnect from their present. We're teaching them how to, in a lot of ways, not be who they are. Like going back to the questions, as a manifest generator, so I'm this hybrid Jekyll and Hyde of being the closed off manifester that just gets to do things and doesn't have to do anything but inform the people around me. This is what I'm doing. Stay the fuck out of my way. And my generator part that has to ask lots of questions because that's how we engage with the world. 70% of the world's population are generators of one type or another. And then you add into that the projectors that need to be invited, the reflectors, and like how we engage with the world, how we participate when questions are shut down and deemed as not important, then we are also, this is another thing, like I was just thinking about how often we're in situations where it's like, save your questions to the end.
Yes.
And I get why some people want to do that, because they might think that, oh, the information I'm about to share, or like if they just give me the chance to share all the information, that you're going to have your question answered. What they don't realize, what a lot of people don't realize is the minute we don't understand something, or the minute we have a question about something, if we are not able to ask that question in the moment, our brains then disengage and are there with that question, and then we can't take in anything
We're not
else
receiving
after
the
that.
information because we're so focused on, got to make sure I am able to still ask my question. And then we're not able to focus on what's actually there for us. Yeah. And for me, what I am working on is the deserving piece, the worthy. Like I consciously know that, but there are times in my body it shows up and I don't feel that way. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And noticing how much no one can make you feel a certain way. And also as children, you're somewhat in your subconscious still, and you're just receiving this information. There were several rooms, you have the ballrooms that were having lots of business meetings. Like there was a pharmaceutical company and there was a dermatological one. And basically it was keep your mouth shut because there's adults that are having these meetings in these big ballrooms. Don't talk when you walk by. And it's almost like from the 60s, it was like, you can be seen, but not heard kind of mentality. It's like, is there really any different than a family coming from the pool who's just like,
boisterous,
being loud and
excited.
boisterous? Exactly. Yeah. And just noticing how we so subtly have children question their deserving and their worthiness, and how we link it to things like, this is a whole nother podcast, but we watched penguins paint. Okay. That's a whole nother podcast for animals and wildlife. Okay. But the penguin would step on the paint and then step on these little things. And the instructor said, I didn't think about who would get what painting. And she said, well, maybe we do, someone said a spelling test. She's like, okay, well, whoever could spell the best gets the first choice. And on the way over to which my body just fully cringed, and like, because we aren't teaching failing in our society, right? We're teaching, you have to get it right. But on the way over, Jason said, I was watching this parenting video and they were talking about teachers in Japan. And he said, what happens, and this might be good for Dominique to clarify, but they were talking about when the student does not know something, they actually get to go up to the board and the whole class gets to help the student solve the problem and understand it. Like they embrace the struggle of not understanding as a whole. And like, that is what is necessary in order to reach mastery. Versus in the Western culture, it's you don't know something is wrong with you. And we praise the A's and we praise the kids that win on the soccer team. But we don't look at struggle in a way of like, it's not a problem. This is what we just don't know. And let's learn it together. Let's see, where you might be stuck. How can we help you and empower you? It's almost like a shutdown. So when the teacher said that about the spelling test, who gets to pick first, several kids were like, no, that stresses me out. Which of course, those are probably the children that spelling may not be their, strength, right? They may
or
not
they
have practiced at
think
it, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Or they think
like,
it's not their strength.
Yeah, plenty of things, right? And just noticing how it's so subtle, right? Like I had to like even point it out to Jason and he was like, oh, I'm like, it's very, very subtle, but it's there. And the children get the message. If you aren't perfect, right? If you're not getting these things on point, you don't get to choose number one.
You don't get to choose what you want in life.
Yeah. And so it was a fascinating day experience. And I guess, for our listeners is we can't control anything outside of us. I think that's what I was getting at with like, no matter how lax we are, not lax, but how, thriving we are in our household, our children are still going to experience the world. Right. But I think the thing that I want to say is, but we do have control of how we show up at home, right? Like, even though Grayson has a tough day at school, or there's things that happen at school that I am a complete fuck no for, she gets to come home to a house and to parents that are thriving in that regard. If we want to use the word thriving, right? Like, my nervous system isn't always resourced, right? But like, we have conversations and it's like, what do we actually have control over, which is our own nervous systems, our own selves, to then model that for our children, right? It's just like, so, yeah.
I think that's one of the most important things that like you and I want to offer is that empowerment piece. And even if you didn't have it in the beginning, it's still attainable. It's still possible. Like this experience that I'm having here with our daughter is, the first day or so that I was here, she was expressing her extreme dissatisfaction with aspects of her childhood. And she's like, of course, there have been lots of things she said that she's appreciated about her childhood, but also just expressing such dissatisfaction about how she perceived a lot of things. And I realized like, I told her I didn't have the resources. I didn't have, I learned how to parent from fear.
Yep.
We were talking about like what motivates us. And I noted that as a kid, she was never really motivated by money or things or whatever. And she had shared with me that she feels motivated by guilt oftentimes. And I was thinking about that this morning when I was meditating. I was like, what motivates me now? Joy, fun, freedom. Those are the things that motivate me. But in the past, it was very much motivated by fear. So when I thought about like my identity as a mom, I mean, I I came to this within the last 3 years. Um, and by then my job as a parent by society's standards was essentially somewhat done, right? I'm always going to be her mom, but she's got an apartment on her own in Japan. She's independent. She has a job that she's amazing at it. Like she doesn't need me, right? By all intents and purposes, she does not need me. Um, and yet this realization of her dissatisfaction with her childhood had me asking, like, how did I parent? Well, I parented from fear because I was in survival, and I had to learn. the I had to teach myself. Basically, I had to save myself first, to secure my own oxygen mask
Yes.
first.
Yep.
Last night when we were talking about the field trip stuff, and her always wanting me to be a field trip mom or us to be field trip parents, um, I was like, I I didn't have those resources.
Hmm.
I always felt like I was just hanging on by a thread, and I couldn't give something I didn't have at the time. And it's never too late, right?
Yes.
If
Yep.
I'm still alive,
Yep.
and so like in this moment, how do I want to be now? And
Yes.
so this has been the practice being a different mom, practice being a mother um, out of that love, that joy, that freedom, that empowerment, and recognizing all the ways in which I parented from fear. And I even saw that a little bit when I got here because actually I saw it in my husband when um, she was like, she's a fairly private person. Um, she's a line 2 4, so she has that hermit prominent in her profile, and she as such, she's like, I like my own space. I don't like, she doesn't share a lot on social media, and she prefers her privacy. And here she is a mom that like everything I do is like
For the
broadcast
taking.
transparent, right? Um, and her dad was giving her a little grief for not having reached out to her grandpa to say that she broke her arm, but yet she had called her other grandma um, about it. And I was like, well, of course you're calling because she's a nurse and Dominique couldn't get a hold of me, and she had some questions. And so her dad was like, you like grandpa didn't even know that you broke your arm. She's like, a lot of people didn't know that I broke my arm because I wasn't reaching out to tell them, right? And um, there was a little bit of that kind of guilt push,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
you should be reaching out to your grandfather. You should um, be a certain way, and this brings me back to the how we disempower oftentimes without realizing, like we have these parameters, these expectations that we set up, what it means to be a mom, what it means to be like respect your elders, and you should be reaching out to certain people. You should do better about keeping in touch with someone, or you should thank a person. You should give a hug you know if they want to
Yeah.
hug you. Like
Yes. Oh gosh.
all of these expectations that we put on kids about um, like telling people maybe ways that we don't feel
Yeah.
like.
And the way that we were raised, I think that obviously comes from the way we were raised, right?
Yep.
I mean, so much my mom was like, made me write thank you notes. And Grayson always brings this up. She's like, Mom, remember when you would always make me write thank you notes and I didn't want to write thank you notes? but not even knowing, right? Like it comes from, I think sometimes it comes from a very genuine place. Like we want these people to know that we appreciate what they did for us. And it is also a very clear line of, one, there are expectations in the world. When you give a gift, people expect to be thanked, right? And why are we giving the gift in the first place? That's number one. And number two of, we are not responsible for other people's feelings. And so, and at the same time, it doesn't mean like you just take a gift and you're no gratitude and no, it's that duality, right? But the expectation that this is what we're supposed to do. So we parent from that same, if we're not aware, we continue the same cycle of what occurred with even though it seems very innocent or very good intentions, we're choosing to, or forcing our children to do things that they don't want to do. And like you said, with the disrespectful, like so many times people will say, well, that was really, if Grayson was being air quotes disrespectful, it's like, but is it also disrespectful that we don't honor our children, that we don't honor what our children want? And then here we come back to conditioning, and then we become 40 and 50 and 30 or 60 and 80 years old. And we're trying to break these patterns of these people pleasing patterns because we were not empowered as children to choose what we wanted to do and to let the chips fall the way that they were going to fall.
Yeah. And it's as humans, everything about us is dualistic in nature. Light, dark, good, bad, right, wrong. And so not only do we have those people out there that are the people pleasers, right? Well, you should be grateful. You should say thank you. You should appreciate. How hard is it just to do this one thing for me because I'm expecting it? But then on the other side, we also have the people that are like, I'm a no. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say what you want me to say. And then we ostracize them as well because they don't fit in. They're bucking the system. They're assholes. They're like, I think about my husband sometimes, like his self-protective mechanism has been, I'm going to remove myself from the situation, or I'm going to isolate myself, or like I'm not going to do that. And so I guess I'm not going to be included. And that's the choice that I need to make in this particular case because this doesn't feel good for me. And so, like that can take also lots of different perspectives, whether it's you're the asshole because you won't do what everybody else wants you to do, or you're caving in to be the people pleaser. And either way, we take away people's doing what's right for them in how we perceive them, right?
Yeah.
And we do that a lot with our kids. They're either being defiant, or they're being isolated, or they're being socially awkward, or they're being people pleasing, and we're classifying them and saying, oh, well, you're this. And all of those things create separation.
Karen Curry Parker talks a lot about this. There's 2 points in children's growth where they learn to say no, and like learning to say no is a healthy thing. And that's like at the age 2, 3, right? The toddler, when they're like, no, 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 because they're getting to learn their voice. They're getting to see that they're a separate person from their parents. And then another around, age like the preteen or the teenager, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, a lot of parents sometimes talk about their kids being defiant, but they're getting to decide what they want and what they don't want. And no is healthy. I'm not advocating, no, I'm not coming home for the night and I'm having sex with my boyfriend. I'm not advocating that, right? And I'm also saying when your child says no, what are we trying to convince them of saying yes for? And no is healthy because as adults, a lot of us don't know how to say no. So looking at the no as a way that our children are being empowered, right? They're getting to say what they actually want, and giving and enhancing or encouraging the empowerment of our children versus the disempowerment. So here's my question to you. What would you give our listeners as some questions that they could ask themselves to further empower their children? I know it's totally on the spot, but.
The first thing that comes to mind is, what are your hell yes and what are your hell no's? And what is your default? This is the thing I would love people to explore. What has been your default? I notice for myself, my default has oftentimes been no. And that's what, or my default was yes when I didn't want to. And so I have been exploring saying no a lot. And recently I've been exploring my no. So what has been your default? Do you say yes to stuff that you don't want to all the time? And what would you like to say no to? So that would be what I would want our listeners to maybe just play with this idea of, what are the hell yeses in your life? What are you like, I am down for that. That feels good. And what are the hell no's for you? And it's like getting the kind of like picking the easy fruit is the hell yes and the hell no. Because then as those things start to become abundant, right? You can see what's the easy picking fruit. Then you start to notice the fruit that you're having to reach for a little bit. And oftentimes it's those sneaky things that maybe weren't a hell no, but they were kind of like, no, no with a question, or yes with a question. Those are the things that lie in our bodies, right? The low hanging fruit is the hell yes and the hell no. And it's all the other fruit on the tree that essentially is the stuff that lies beyond our conscious awareness. And that's all the yes and the no that's in the body that hasn't maybe been practiced. Does that make sense?
The thing that I would suggest parents think about in order to empower their children is to ask them questions. I see it a lot of other parents telling the children what to do, telling the children what to think, versus when your kid comes to you and says, I want to do XYZ, instead of immediately saying no, why do you want to? Tell me more about that. And then we can kind of get into the mindset or the desire of why they're wanting to do something. I think that is so. What we're going to say.
I got a on the spot question for you now. So asking questions, and what would you say if you've got a manifester or a pure manifester or a manifest generator for a kid?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's one of the things that we've talked about, like knowing how your kid is with human design, right? Because you will parent each child differently. But when I ask, when my kid is not in her manifestor energy, when she's in her generator energy, and I say, can I ask you some questions? That helps me. I think before I'd just be like, no, right? Like it was immediate no, versus for her, the reason why she wants to do this, or kind of understanding and then empowering her. How can she do that? Right. Versus it's a no, I don't want to do that. I think has been really helpful.
I would also suggest maybe, especially if your child is a manifester, or if they're a manifest generator and they're in that manifester energy, and your kid says, I want to do this. And if they're not questions to be asked, like if it's not the generator to ask questions, then maybe the question that you need to ask yourself as a parent is there safety? Is
Yeah.
there um, is there health? And of course, this is going to be subjective for
Yep.
parents and how they see the world, but like, is my child at risk of death?
Yeah.
Because a manifester or a manifest generator child that's in that state will say to you, because I want to. They might
Yeah.
not know exactly what it is, why it is that they want something. They'll have that impulse to just go do it.
Yeah.
And so, if they say, I want to go roller skating, or I want to ride a pony, or I want to, do these things. Okay, how can I help maybe facilitate that, and teaching them like basic safety. I want to go run out into the middle of the street. Well, no, that's probably not a safe thing to do. And what is it that you're wanting to run out in the street for? So,
Yeah. I think, and I didn't say it, but I think there's like a blanket, like, I think knowing your child's human design is like, right? Because then you get to
yeah,
parent them very differently than, and Grayson's really good at informing. I'm going to go on the hammock. I'm going to go inside and get on my phone. I'm going to, and that is when she's in that manifestor energy. What I was going to say, when you said they ask, but if they're truly in their energy, they're not asking. Like when Grayson's in her like unconditioned manifestor energy, she doesn't ask. She just says, this is what I'm going to go do. And so that's even fascinating too. Like the unconditioned parts of her, she doesn't ask. She just says, this is what I'm going to go do. So yeah. Anything else you want to say about empowering her children?
It's as important to empower ourselves, to find our own empowerment as parents, as it is the empowerment of our children. Because if we don't have the resources to feel empowered ourselves, if we don't have the resource to connect us to our own love and compassion, then we will fall short as parents. And so, like, if you've got some conditioning, like, what do you want to do about that?
Yeah.
Because we all have it.
Yep.
So, yeah, to empower ourselves to decondition and make powerful choices about who we want to be in the world is ultimately what we're inviting the world to do, right? Let's look at how you've previously defined yourself and be curious about how you want to do it in the future based on who you are right now.
So good.
Yes. Until next time.
Until next time. Bye, friends.
Bye.